All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Um, just a quick reminder that the links to today's handouts are in the chat. And at the end of the series, we have one more session next week, next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. We will be asking that you do complete the workshop survey. And if you didn't get a chance to already, if you could rename yourself to your first name, library you work at, and your pronouns, that'd be very helpful. Thank you. We'd like to invite you guys to join with your cameras if you're comfortable today. We will have a breakout session later on. If you're on desk and listening, please participate in the breakout session by using your chat box. But we really hope that you've been able to make the time to join us here live and be fully present for the next couple of hours. I am Kathy Lancaster. I am the Youth Services Coordinator at the Library of Michigan, and I coordinate the Ready to Read Michigan program, which is supported in part by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We're so happy to have Pamela Martin-Diaz back with us again today for more on Storytimes for everyone. So let's get the ball rolling. Pamela, if you want to unmute and join us.
Got it. Thank you. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. And there we go. So welcome to part 2 of Everybody Reads now, Storytimes for Everyone. Before I start, I would just like to take a minute to acknowledge all of the things that you all have been doing for what is, I'm sorry to say, approaching 2 years. I know it has not been easy, that with controversies around masks and vaccinations and all those things that are taking away from, kind of sap our energy and all that. I appreciate the fact that you have a mindset that is encouraging you to keep learning, and I really do appreciate your taking the time to spend a couple of hours with me again today. So we're going to start with early literacy components and practices. Well, I have to tell you that this is one of my favorite things to talk about because it includes, so the components of decoding and comprehension are split into different parts, right? Decoding has my personal favorite, which is phonological awareness, and you'll see why in just a few minutes. But here's what we're going to be covering today. I'm not exactly sure towards the end. We'll have to see how time is working for us, how quickly we move through all of this. So it might be a little different at the end. And also, apology ahead of time. I did change the a little bit of the order of some of the slides when I was reviewing them, but not too dramatically. You should still be able to follow along if that's helpful for you. So here we go. What are we talking about again? Early literacy. It is what children know about communication, language, and verbal and nonverbal reading and writing before they can actually read and write. It encompasses all of children's experiences with print, conversation, stories that they've heard and that have been read to them. We are not teaching reading, right? We're laying the foundation upon which a child who reads with understanding is built. Here are the components of early literacy, which we're going to be looking at in some depth. Here are the 5 practices: talk, read, write, sing, and play everywhere and every day. By the end of our time today, or perhaps early the next time we're together, you will see a clear connection between the practices and the components, because we make connections between these two things. We want adults to see how what they do with their young children is helping them develop these skills, which will enable them to either decode or comprehend, and comprehend what they are reading. So we're going to be talking about what we call early literacy tips or asides, or little nuggets of information that we share with adults during our story times and interactions with them. During story times, we highlight just one early literacy component. And this is because, well, frankly, most people can't remember too many things at once. And because we do an activity specifically related to one early literacy tip, we're able to make a really firm and tight connection between the idea and the practice. We use two tips in our story time interactions with the adults. The first one is the example tip, which we do after we use, we say after doing a particular activity or pointing something out. And then we do an empower or encourage tip. And that is when we share an idea with the adults about how they can carry on the component at home. Since we don't have access to the children all day long like their grown-ups do, it's really important for adults to also play around with these different components with their children throughout the day. So, but we don't just throw any, the information out there in any old way. We want the tips that we use to be what we call effective, right? So simply we take an activity or a practice, we use the definition of the component and tie it back to one of the two processes of reading. If we don't tie it back, if we don't complete the circle, if we don't tell them why what they're doing is important, it's not considered effective. When you think about it, for decades, we've been telling grown-ups, read to your child for 15 minutes a day. We never told them why, right? And I, for one, like to know why things happen and why I'm asked to do certain things. So, for example, this would work when you clap out the syllables to a word, all right? You're helping children hear the smaller sounds in words, which will enable them to decode words when they're learning how to read. Okay, that's how this works. When you read a book with a child and you help them understand the meanings of words by giving different definitions, you're helping build your child's ability to comprehend or understand what they are reading. That's what makes it effective. So now we're going to take a look at the early literacy components one by one and seeing how they specifically relate to story time, or most specifically to books. So, and what are they again? Phonological awareness, the ability to hear and play with the smaller sounds in words, print conventions and awareness, knowing that print is everywhere and has meaning, letter knowledge, knowing that letters are different from one another and represent a sound. We're going to be focusing for this part of the presentation on the early literacy practice of read. And this is because we know from research that reading together with children is the single most important way to help them get ready to read. And also because a lot of the examples that I will be sharing with you directly jump off from books. Not all of them, but many of them do. phonological awareness, the ability to hear and play with the smaller sounds in words. So it has 5 different levels, beginning with earlier, less complex activities, up to activities that require kind of a higher level of cognitive development. And yeah. It also, of course, is made up of different components. One of them is rhyme, which is recognizing that usually it's the ends of words rhyme or sound alike. Alliteration is understanding or hearing that beginnings of words can sound alike too. Sentence segmenting is knowing that sentences are made up of different words. A sentence is not just one long word, okay? It has different words in it. Syllable blending and segmenting is being able to hear syllables and later blend them back together. Phonemic awareness, knowing that words are made up of separate sounds that can be broken into parts. So we're going to take a look at each of these different elements. So you remember from dialogic reading, we talked about completion prompts. We can see if children can hear rhyme when we do things like leave out the rhyming word. This is assuming, of course, you've been doing this rhyme, this finger play for a while, so the children know it. By saying Jack and Jill went up the, and then you leave it blank, you don't say it, waiting for them to fill in the missing rhyming word. To fetch a pail of water. Of course, Mother Goose has lots and lots of rhymes in them that are part of our, become actually part of our background knowledge, and children's too. Information and things that they acquire through experience and through being taught. So we also have rhyme within books, right? Mama Llama rhymes, and phone and moan also rhyme. So the first step in rhyming is just literally hearing it. And so we play around with nursery rhymes and things like that. We repeat them, they hear rhyme, they become familiar with it, we point it out. The next step is being able to recognize like which words rhyme. So first you have to be able to hear it, and then you can say, which of these words rhyme? And the third and most difficult part is being able to produce a rhyme. Just as when you are learning a new language, you often hear people say, I know more than I can say. So that's because our receptive vocabulary is bigger than our ability to actually produce words. It's the same thing here. And children can hear the different sounds within words. There's a beginning sound like r for red, the middle sound and the ending sound red or ed. That's phonemic awareness, and it can be a little tricky for children to do. That's why it's at the higher end you saw along that spectrum of phonological awareness. Now you can look for rhymes everywhere. You don't have to just use a rhyming book. If you want to play around with phonological awareness, you can do so just by picking out words that rhyme from whatever book you happen to be using. For example, in this book, Red House, Tree House, Little Bitty Brown Mouse, I'm going to do a rhyme with, let's say, house and mouse. So I can make up a little rhyming song. House, mouse, these words rhyme. House, mouse, these words rhyme. House, mouse, these words rhyme. So rhyme along with me. And I could do another word that rhymes with house or mouse. I could also ask everybody in the room, well, hopefully the children, if they can think of another word that rhymes, that shares the same sound as house or mouse. Now, it doesn't have to be a real word. It can be anything that shares the same sound. So inventive made-up words are fine. You can, of course, use a rhyming book. It makes sense, right? To just pick up from the rhymes that you're reading. So for example, Spring, summer, fall, all day long, bears grow big, bears grow strong. But in the fall, when leaves turn red, bears know soon it's time for bed. So you can do another rhyming song. Rhyme, rhyme, rhyme along with me. Fall and, oops, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Oh my goodness. Long and strong or rhyming words. Please sing next time with me. Note to self, you need to pick them out ahead of time. Rhyme, rhyme, rhyme along with me. Red and bed are rhyming words. Please sing next time with me. So there you go, another little rhyming song for you. Can also play I Spy with My Little Eye in a number of different ways. So I spy with my little eye something that rhymes with, and then you can pick an image from one of the pages in the book that you're using. I spy with my little eye something that rhymes with bee, the insect. And then if children are having a hard time generating the rhyming word, you can give them some choices. Is it 3, squirrel, right? You see how it goes. And because that way, if they're not quite there, they'll just pick the one that rhymes. You can also just look at a picture and say, do things like I hear with my little ear, something that rhymes with, and again, we can do house and mouse. You can ask them to give you a word that rhymes with it, or you can give them 3 words. For example, which of these words rhymes with mouse? Is it house, tree, or boy? And then they pick the right one. I hear with my little ear something that starts with this sound, but. So you can go ahead and if they can't say boy, or they don't remember, or they don't say boat, you can go ahead and give them some options. And this is the kind of information you can share with grown-ups that they can use as part of your encourage tip. You can say, when you're out and about, play a little I spy or I hear game, and pick out some items that share the same sound and ask your child to guess it. This will help them decode or figure out what they are reading when they're bigger. So as I mentioned, Mother Goose has so many different kinds of early literacy skills in them, alliteration being one of them. Think of Silly Sally, Miss Muffet. A lot of them have the first letter of words being the same. So grown-ups, did you know that children that have high familiarity with Mother Goose books have stronger phonological skills than children who know fewer rhymes? And grown-ups, did you know that good phonological skills are a better indicator of ease with which a child will learn how to read than IQ? So that's some more examples of the kinds of information that you can share with adults when you're doing your early literacy asides. You can also use books like Woodpecker Wants a Waffle for lots of alliteration. And also this is fun for adults. All these little shout outs have the animal and the name of the food with sharing the same initial sound. Now, segmentation, knowing that sentences have different words and that words have syllables. So children become familiar with segmentation when they're quite young, when we do things like pat a cake. For example, pat a cake, baker's mat, right? That's segmentation. It's actually closer to hearing the rhythm of language. Segmentation, if you want to do it like really work on this with older children, it becomes more complicated, like this. Pat a cake, baker's mat. It's a lot faster and it's harder to do. But that is showing how each of these different parts of a word has its own clap. That's how children can hear how the words are being taken apart. We can do segmentation with names. Now, if we were in person, I would ask you to who has the longest name. My name, Pamela, has 3 syllables. So I don't know how many syllables are in your names. How, anybody here? Let's see, I see a Bethany, Marisa, Maria, Colleen. A lot of variation there. Kids like to, anytime you use their name, they're like, yay, it's me. So you can do this just if you want to introduce everybody to one another, you can just, use their names and do the clapping out and use this as your information with grown-ups. The longest name is one of the longest names that I've heard is one of my daughter's names. She doesn't have a middle name because her first name is so long. Elisiana, 5 syllables. That's a very long name. You can also do this with dinosaurs. So, I mean, okay, let's be honest. There's so much you can do with dinosaurs. This is just another thing. But it gives you another way to do dinosaurs. I've done dinosaurs for like a math science thing where we sort them by the length, if they have long necks or if they eat, if they're carnivores, omnivores, or herbivores, we do charts and all the things. But doing this with their names is a lot of fun. However, you need to practice ahead of time, because when you find one of the names and it's like, it's 15 letters long, it takes a minute, like for you to be able to, well, for me anyway, to be able to actually say it smoothly. And you can start off, the thing is, most of them are really long, but so you can always start with T-Rex, right? And then go into Tyrannosaurus Rex. And you can count them, with your fingers, and it's just, you can stomp it out. Tyrannosaurus Rex, get them up and moving, right? Learning with their whole bodies. And of course, you can also do this with flowers, vegetables, like, Lois Ellert's planting a rainbow, vegetable soup, anything where you've got just nouns. You can do rose, petunia, right? Peas, broccoli. You get the idea. It's really a lot of fun. You can also delete syllables, right? By, for example, say sandwich, sandwich. Now say it again without the sand, which. Now say it together, put them back together, sandwich. And you can, it helps. Now, okay, now say it without the which, sand. And then they're saying the second part in their brain, put it back together, sandwich. The first version of Every Child Ready to Read had all these little cards and of 2 or 3 syllable words that you cut in half, and you take them apart, put them together to help children hear the different syllables in words. It's a little activity or game you could do after story time when you do your, after story time activity. Onomatopoeia is a really fun. It's also a cool word. So it's when, animal sounds are written like this. Yip, 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 yip. It brings her attention. You can point to the words as you say them. Now singing. So singing is a natural way to learn about language. Songs help children develop listening skills, and it helps them pay attention to the rhythms and rhymes of spoken language. And when we do things like clap along, it's helping children hear syllables in words and helps them improve their motor skills too. And it can even help them grow their vocabularies, as we'll see when we look at some different aspects of singing. So sing when the Spirit says sing. Singing brings us together. It's a shared experience. It's such an integral part of story time for so many of us. So take this. Of course, we all know the eensy weensy spider, but look what happens. So I know you're still you're muted. So go ahead. Let's just say it. Don't say it as if it were a rhyme. Just say it. Okay. The eensy weensy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain. So the eensy weensy spider climbed up the spout again. Okay, so it doesn't exactly have the same kind of thing to it, does it, as when we sing it. The eensy weensy spider climbed up the water spout. So notice, eensy weensy spider. It helps them hear the separate sounds in the words, those syllables, because when we sing, often each part of a word or word has its own note. And that's what, so grown-ups singing helps children sharpen their ears to hear the smaller sounds in words. So remember, when I say grown-ups, I'm using basically an aside that could be shared during an interaction with an adult. The alphabet song, you know, your children learn new information when they A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Well, have you ever tried to sing the alphabet song to a different tune? So try it with Mary Had a Little Lamb. I have to start singing Mary Had a Little Lamb in my brain before I can actually do it, because I just want to fall into the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star version. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So it's like, you know, your brain is kind of going like, what? That's not right. But, you know, we know just because children know the alphabet song, it doesn't mean they know the alphabet. So if we are going to sing a song, it would behoove us to actually have the alphabet there. So we're also doing some mixing in a little bit of letter knowledge here, because you see, that's the thing about a lot of these early literacy components is they're intertwined. They work together, okay? Another example would be, so you know where I'm going with this, right? B-I-N-G-O, B-I-N-G-O, and bingo was its name. So, you know, I've used this with so many different things, even some that really didn't, I mean, sort of fit, like C-O-O-K-I-E, 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 cookies, but I like to eat. That's a stretch, but P-I-Z-Z-A is an easy one. Holding up letters, you can combine singing with letter knowledge, and this is a nice interactive kind of thing where you hand out the different letters that you're going to be playing around with to the children ahead of time, and then they hold it up when you sing it. Because remember, interactivity is an important part of these story times, because we really want everyone to be involved. Now, of course, through singing, you can learn some new words. This is from how many versions of over in the meadow are there? We have over in the rainforest, etc., etc. Over in the forest, in a hole in a tree, lived an old mother snake and her little snakelets 3. Slither. All right. So if you're doing a story time on animal movements, for example, or movement in general, or in, you know, in the rainforest or the, you know, plains, whatever you want to do with this, you're exposing children to different new words. And then if I were doing this, I would use a really simple little piggyback song, and it goes like this. Have you ever seen a snake, a snake, a snake? Have you ever seen a snake slither this way and that, slither this way and that way? You get the idea, right? And you could also include the new name of the animal. Have you ever seen a calf? Calf, if you're talking about the elephant, a calf, a calf. Have you ever seen the calf lumber this way and that? And then, of course, everybody's on their feet doing the movements. It will help them remember how this goes. I've used a similar, the same, you know, I mean, piggyback songs, you know, it's just the way to go. It's so much easier to remember the words to a new song rather than trying to learn a new song, the tune, and then new words on top of it, right? So you could do, have you ever heard a snake, a snake, a snake? Have you ever heard a snake hiss this way and that? And you get the idea. Go on from there. So songs with sequence are, sequence is a pattern that's repeated at least twice, and it's an important part of mathematical thinking. And a lot of books are built on piggyback songs too. So in this Spunky Little Monkey, it's noted in the back that this is actually built around a children's song that you might know. It's something like, down, down, baby, down, down the roller coaster, sweet, sweet baby, I'll never let you go. Shimmy, shimmy, cocoa pop, shimmy, shimmy, pow. So it's built on that. So again, you've got a piggyback song, and you've got activities that will help children remember what they're doing. It's in a particular order or sequence. Just like there was a tree, and this is built on the, and around the, there's a hole in the ground, and you know, round and round, it's from that song. And so this cumulative stories helps children remember things also. And they're fun to do, and they can be really interactive. This is a kind of thing that's nice to do with a flannel board, or just going back through and reading the book again. I'm not very like clever in the artsy craftsy kind of way. So you can, you know, you can use the book or see what other people have done online, because people are so generous in sharing patterns and things like that. This song with the sequence is, this is the way we wash our clothes, etc. We encourage adults to do this when they're with their children and wanting to do things in order. Probably this is from, I would say, like the Little Red Hen, right? That when you want to talk about the steps of planting the seed, right? Watering it, and all the different steps. So this kind of sequencing helps children remember the order of stories, that stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is part of narrative skills, background knowledge as well. Again, you can see how these are starting to really intertwine and work together. So songs are great because knowing songs, it helps children learn rhymes. It helps them learn facts. There's that sense of enjoyment and pleasure and joy around singing. We can read books. We can share books that are songs. There are lots of singable songs like The Babies on the Bus and things like that. There are refrains and patterns. Think about a song, right? You've got a chorus, and then you have the refrain. That's a pattern. Spatial relationships, right? The bear went over the mountain, things like that. The Duke of York went up and then down again. Sequence, as we just saw in the moving the head of the ding dong and all that, cumulative tales, and of course, vocabulary words. So, but how do we go about, look, there's so much involved here. So like, how should we go about teaching songs anyway? Well, it is helpful to have them printed out so that the adults can see them. Sometimes you just use, you know, a whiteboard and write the words so that the grown-ups can read them if they're new. I don't know how you all feel about handouts during story time. I personally got somewhat discouraged by handing out handouts just to find them scattered among the library later, as if nobody really paid attention to them. So that's kind of a personal decision, but do give them the option to read them if at all possible. And you need to repeat, and repeat the songs 3 times. All right, before you have any reasonable expectation of them joining in. And then we know for story times for infants and to some extent toddlers, we want to repeat the same content. I'd say about at least 60% should be the same every week, because how else are they going to learn it? You know, it takes time for everybody to learn and memorize things. We can, when we sing songs like we did with Jack and Jill, leave out a word and let them fill it in. we can do a call and response. For example, I say the first part and you say the second part. And that is, that's kind of a fun way to do things. So for example, I would say, down, down, baby. And then you would echo me and go, down, down, baby. And then I would say, down, down the roller coaster. And you go, down, down the roller coaster. Sweet, sweet baby, sweet, sweet baby. I'll never let you go. I'll never let you go. And that's really fun because it's super interactive and no one worries about messing up because we're doing it all together. Another way is to say it first, ask them to repeat it back to you, and then add the melody. So because especially if it's a new melody, as I said before, it's, you know, new words and a new tune, it can be pretty hard to do for a lot of us. So some people are like, I can't sing, I don't like to sing. And no. If you don't know any new songs, as somebody mentioned in the chat box the last time we were together, hi thee right away to Jayberry, because Dana and Lindsay have a beautifully organized collection of songs, rhymes, finger plays, early literacy information, the whole ball game. I mean, it's amazing what they have. They are not opera singers. They're regular people with regularly good voices. They can carry a tune, but they're not intimidating. And they're also, they're so friendly and have such a great rapport. It's really fun to watch to learn from them. Forget about forgetting words. The kids don't know if you mess up, right? Especially if you're just singing, like for example, when I do the ants go marching one by one, or I make up the words to that tune or something. If I forget it, I just substitute in something that rhymes. And nobody's walked out of story time yet because I forgot something. Oh, please don't let that ever happen. And again, having a good voice, as long as you enjoy yourself, it doesn't really matter. And that's the thing that counts. I use recorded music for sure. I do a lot of the singing, and then we usually have one recorded music song to get up and move. Because I think we met like Jim Gill. Today I did We Are the Dinosaurs, because you just have to do that song every once in a while. Plus I was able to put in some dinosaur books in the story time I had. And of course, Jim Gill and Raffi, your other favorites. So it's easy for me to say, it doesn't matter how well you sing. Can you imagine if this is the reaction that you got?
Somewhere over the rainbow. It's okay. Oh, I dance with somebody. I want to be on the heat with somebody. Somewhere over the rainbow. It's okay. It's okay. You don't like that song? It's okay.
I really love that. She had a really nice voice, but anyway, children love singing, and it is such an important part of what we do with them. So go ahead, sing your hearts out. I doubt anyone will burst into tears even if they don't care for the song. So letter knowledge, moving right along, knowing the same letter can look different, that letters have names and represent sounds. So look how tricky it is. Here's the letter E, right? And each one looks different. So basically what we're talking about is that they're different, but they're also the same. Okay, you can see why this could be a little complicated for young minds to learn. And research tells us grown-ups that children learn letters based on shapes. Shapes are the beginning, the initial step towards learning letters. So during story time, when you're talking about shapes, you could say to everybody, make some letters. with your hands, and the grown-ups can show kids how to do that. You could have children make, shapes or letters, start with shapes, in the air or with their fingers, with their whole bodies. You can line children up to make different shapes on the floor. You can do little songs like draw a circle in the air, draw a circle in the air, draw a circle in the air. Now draw it everywhere. Draw a circle in the air. Another piggyback song, right? And of course, after story time, when you can bring out your blocks when you're able to do things like this again and talk about three-dimensional shapes. So children, in terms of things being alike and different, it doesn't really matter so much for things like dogs and cars. We know it's a dog, we know it's a car. You can ignore the kind of finer points of differences among them, unless of course you're shopping for a car or a dog. But look what happens when you look at the alphabet. We have the lowercase n. The only difference between N and H is this little bit of protrusion up here. And N looks like a Z, like one of them's on its side. And E and F, again, such a small difference. But those little differences make all the difference in the world. We can talk about how things are alike and different when we compare objects. Like, look how baby llama looks like toy llama. They're the same, they're both llamas, right? But they're different. How are they different? I did this in story time today. How are they different? Not with this exact thing, but this one is smaller. This is a toy, right? Things like that. Its eyes are different. This doesn't have eyelashes, etc. So again, there are lots of books that just have shapes in them. And this is obviously a board book for a younger child that is called Corduroy Shapes. And so if you're just sitting and talking with a young child about shapes, that's fine. There are also books that have shapes in them. This one actually, the Ellen Stoll Walsh books, all that deal with concepts, also have a storyline, which is nice. And then books like City Shapes, looking around the city environment. You can also talk about shapes in books that don't really have anything to do with shapes by pointing them out. Here we go again with Red House, Tree House, Little Bitty Brown Mouse. You're starting to see you can use a lot of books. You can do just about any early literacy component that you want to with them. So where are the shapes in this? Well, you just have to look a little bit at an oval and look at all the triangles. When we talk about triangles or shapes with children, we need to mention what they are. This is a triangle. It has 3 sides and 3 angles. Because see, this is a triangle too, but it looks different from this one. Again, they're the same, but they're different. They're all triangles. Some are equilateral, some are right angle. Here's another little shape down here. Alphabet books can be useful. A lot of them have uppercase and lowercase letters. You probably know that alphabet books come for all different age groups. But you've also probably noticed, if you've used an alphabet book or even looked at it, that sometimes the word that they pick to represent a sound can be confusing. The classic one, like G, the letter G, which often has the G sound, like G for giraffe and G for goat. And this is one of the interesting, complex things about alphabet books. And for that reason, is probably not the best way to teach the children the alphabet. So when you see the letter B, it has the name B. This means it's the sound. So the letter named B represents the B sound, like in bat, but at. That's the phonemic awareness part, but at, the ability to put the sounds together. Letters have names and represent sounds, and there's a close relationship with phonological awareness and letter awareness because of this, right? So when children are doing inventive spelling, like if you give older preschoolers the opportunity to write, and we'll look at this when we look at writing, they might be writing words the way they hear them, leaving out entire letters, okay? But that's the sound and written relationship between phonological awareness and letter knowledge. This was a pretty significant part of Every Child Ready to Read first version. They were more encouraging of things like letter days and things like that have kind of gone out of fashion now. But we need to remember when we are talking about letters to name the letter and the sound that the letter represents. Okay, so if I'm going to talk about a letter, or when I do talk about a letter, it's in a pretty casual context, and it wouldn't probably be the focus of the story time. In all honesty, I focus more on phonological awareness and background knowledge and vocabulary, because of the fact they're unconstrained skills, and we're trying to help with fill in some of the background knowledge that some children are lacking. But you take a look, a book like this, The Babies on the Bus. Well, that's pretty obvious that this is the letter B, and it represents the B sound. So there's no harm in doing it. In fact, it's a good thing to do. They do preschool would like, they want children to go to kindergarten knowing some letters, right? And especially the letters in their names. Learning how to write their names is important, which you can help them with when you give them an opportunity to create something after story time, and then ask them to sign their name. Also, with name tags. So this is, again, I was introduced to this from Every Child Ready to Read version 1. This is the rough order of sounds as they develop in children's speech. So notice that they're the hard consonants for the most part. And we have the very popular and well hoped for P that the papa wants to hear, the M that mama wants to hear, and the D that daddy is hopeful for, right? These are the initial sounds that children learn just, naturally, because remember, language is natural. Learning how to read needs to be taught. So next is print awareness and concepts. It is knowing that print has meaning, noticing print everywhere, knowing how to handle a book, knowing the direction that text goes in. It's also knowing that words represent what we say. The spoken word is written, and that words represent things. So that's symbolic thinking. Every once in a while, we can casually point this out when we, run our finger under the name of a title and we point out the author. We can play around with this somewhat if we hand a child a book like backwards, right? And they're going to be like, oh no, or you start reading it like this and see what they, no, that's not right. You can't read a book like, oh my goodness, what happened here? And then you turn it around right side up. And in English, of course, we read from left to right. When I can, in the library where I used to work, we had multiple board book sets. So I had one copy of a book for each child for like a small preschool, or for baby programs, like 10 would usually be enough with 10 adults, or you could use 2 different books with different but related subjects. And with my preschool classes, I hand them out and everybody gets a book, or they're pairs of 2. And I say, show me the front of the book. And they show me the front of the book. Show me the back of the book. And they show me the back of the book. We talk about the spine. This is an early literacy screening. It's on early literacy screening tools. So it's a good thing it's for us to do with them. And then I say, okay, so remember how this works. When I say ding, turn the page. And so I go ding, open the book, and then they open the book and I read it. And then I say ding, turn the page, and they turn the page. Now, for some books that the children know, they say along with me. And what I really love about this, and the kids, so, and it's seriously, in all the story times I have ever done this with, there has never been a child who has not participated. The little kid that in the Head Start classroom that goes off into a corner and sits by themselves will do this. Nobody has ever refused to share what I call the little books. I love this because this helps them see themselves as readers. And I think that is really, really powerful. So sometimes text is part of the story. This is from Baking Day at Grandma's. There's literally a recipe in the back of the book. When I did this book in Storytime, we talked about the recipe. I brought in a cookbook and I brought in, for them to see that books are used for different purposes. I think I probably brought in some ingredients and pointed out, we read the labels, environmental print, and all that kind of thing. Sometimes writing is used in a different way in stories with your basic list. And this is a great kind of thing you can encourage grown-ups to do by saying things like, grown-ups, when you're getting ready to go shopping, get out a piece of paper and a pencil and make a list. And to explain to your child you're making a list of things you're going to buy. This helps your child see that print has meaning. Okay, you could also ask them to add to the list, but you never know what you're going to end up with. So you might want to be a little careful about that. And even if people use cell phones and they use their cell phone and they type words on it, that's still seeing that print has meaning. Environmental print is print everywhere. I mean, we jokingly say that children's first, the first environmental print that they know is the golden archers at McDonald's, right? They learn that symbols represent things from their own life experiences, but we can also point it out on things like, look, this bus is going on Market Street. We know that because it says right here at the top of the bus. And here's another, not words, but a symbol. The symbol represents a real thing, a bus. So moving right along to the second part, which is early literacy components, okay, of comprehension. Vocabulary, knowing the names of things, and background knowledge, which is what children know through experience or by being taught. So vocabulary is recognizing words and knowing the meanings of words, objects, actions, concepts, feelings, and ideas. It's important for both comprehension and decoding. If you remember back to when we talked last week and talked about fluency and how children who couldn't read or adults who can't read fluently, it's because they're decoding the words as they go, right? And that's the role that vocabulary plays with decoding. Because grown-ups, it's easier to read a word you know than one you don't, okay? Children learn vocabulary from the concrete to the abstract, and they need words to describe feelings, ideas, things. And of course, there's a progression in vocabulary development as well. How do children learn words? Well, in part, through life experiences. Let's say in your library and your play area, you have a little market. So they come to the library and they play market. And then they go with their grown-ups to the farmer's market, right? And when they were little, and even now, sometimes just for fun, you do to market to buy a fat pig. Home again, jiggity jig. And now you're in school and you're confronted with this. You're like, oh, good grief, market. You don't know that yet, but you know about segmentation. You've got all this information in your life. Your life experiences are informing your education. So you're going to put that into its word chunks, and now you can read mark it. So you can see how this builds, right? From nursery rhymes to experiences, like when we talk about the home early literacy environment, we're including things like, does the family go places with the child? You know, do they go to the library? Do they go to the farmer's market? And do they talk about the things that they're seeing? Now, language develops, of course, we know from last week, over time, along with vocabulary. And so remember, this is about 24 months. They've got the requisite 50 words for dialogic reading. And then gradually their vocabulary increases. So some children enter school knowing 5,000 words. Other children go to school knowing 20,000 words. So who do you think is going to be the better reader? So when we look at vocabulary instruction, I know this is sounds very teacher-ish, but to me, it makes a lot of sense when I think about what kind of words I want to highlight when, now. So we have tier 1 words, which are words that are used everyday speech, right? And tier 2 words are a lot of the words that we get in books for children. So adults use about 9 rare words for every 1,000 when speaking to a child. Books have 3 times as many. So every time they're sharing books, they're getting 3 times as many rare words. And grown-ups, that's why reading is a more effective way to build vocabulary than family conversations or television viewing, because books have more rare words than any of those things. Even so you look at you figure, like, seriously, what can you do with something like this? Well, again, remember, talk, and talk. You can compare wings to wings, colors, shapes, checkerboards to stripes and circles. Even a book that seems so simple, like Dear Zoo, when they're talking about the camel, they use the word, he was too grumpy. So they sent him back. So there's so many, like the monkey was too naughty, right? He behaved so badly, he was naughty. And so we can encourage grown-ups when they use these kinds of words to also explain what it is that they mean. And of course, books that have different facial expressions on them, books with different emotions, being grumpy, and helping children put words to their feelings. It not only helps them build their vocabulary, but it's a first step to help them control their emotions. We ask children to use their words and not to act things out. So we need to make sure that they have the words to use, okay? So that's tied to social emotional development as well. We need to talk about feelings with children to provide that vocabulary. And we can add new words all through story time, before story time, interacting with children, and after. We can take the most basic thing that we do, like the Hokey Pokey, and turn it into a whole different kind of language experience. When we do the Hokey Pokey, I use things like knuckles, K-N-U-C-K-L-E. Boy, that's a lot easier to read if you know what a knuckle is. So we put our knuckles in, we put our elbows in, right? We put in, you want to get a laugh, tell them to put your nostrils in and then shake them all about. The grown-ups might think you're a little odd, but that's all part of the whole thing, right? Even again, books like this, we can say, what's this? Cat, right? That's a cat. It has stripes. The dog doesn't have stripes. It has 2 different colored ears, and so on. Look at the shapes on here. We just have to start thinking a little differently about how we talk with children, because that's how they're going to learn more words. Now, there are information books for little children, mostly are just like board books with very few words. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to use all of the rich language that we possess to talk about them. Again, same and different, compare and contrast, right? Which one has the longest nose? Which of these animals has stripes? That kind of thing is helping children learn more words. Now, again, if they don't have the words, we're going to wait the 5 seconds and then provide them with that kind of help. We can take a book like this, The Home Builders. It's a book about environments. And so I've decided, okay, I want to talk about trees. So I'm just going to use this as an example. We can talk about the trunk of the tree, right? It has bark on it. Now that's a word that has multiple meanings. Dogs bark. This isn't that bark. We can bring in a piece of bark so that they can see what bark actually is. All right. And then we can talk about the branches or limbs. A tree has limbs. And the leaf has veins. And then we can talk about the human body, right? Our body is often referred to as a trunk. We have limbs, our arms and our legs. We also have veins. How are we the same and how are we different? It's such a rich experience when we think about things, start to think about things a little differently. So Anna Dewdney had such a delightful way with language. Baby llama stomps and pouts. Llama llama red pajama hollers loudly for his mama. So we could read this all the way through and then go back and have everybody stand up. Okay, you ready? Now we're going to stomp and pout. So here we go. Stomp. Now pout. Stomp. Now pout. We're going to holler. We're going to shout. And you can just play around with all this stuff because holler is the same thing as shouting or yelling. So after story time, if it's a little noisy, hey, you guys, please don't holler. Please use your quieter voice now. And who's pouting? I mean, maybe not saying that's about other people's children, but giving the grown-ups the opportunity or like saying, yeah, they need to know that you don't really like that. And stopping and pouting, not a great combination, child to grown-up, right? And we're going to choose picture books that have rich and beautiful language. This has the eagle launching, whoosh, and it mentions shenanigans. A lot of these words can just be picked up through context. If you think it might not be picked up with the context, feel free to, before you start the story time, explain that there are a couple of words that you want to make sure they know. These aren't critical to the understanding of the book, so you could probably just keep going. But there are certain words that you really need to make sure everybody knows when they're absolutely critical to this story. So I'm thinking it's a little bit after 2. We can resume with Caps for Sale in about 5 minutes. Would you like a couple minute stretch here? So to come back, yeah, refresh yourselves or get some fresh coffee or water. And should we come back at 2:10? Does that work? Yeah.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. No problem. Thank you.
All right. So we're back from our break and we'll let you get back to Caps for Sale here.
Yeah. So I was just talking about how some words children can understand in a story through context, right? But Caps for Sale, before you even start, you need to make sure that they know certain things, right? That people don't really call these caps anymore. Hat is usually what they're, I mean, baseball cap maybe, but baseball hat for sure. Children know what hats are. This is also a cap. It's a bottle cap. Kids are familiar with that. A little less familiar with it. A cap on a tooth, just putting it out there. So we might want to explain that this is a peddler, and a peddler is a person who sells things from door to door. We don't really have many peddlers anymore, right? So we want to make sure that they understand what this story is about, and that these are the caps or hats that the peddler is selling. It all seems so obvious when you start thinking about it. And it just helps so children don't have to, you know, they would puzzle it out, but let's just give them the information when we have the opportunity. And, you know, we can use books to talk about things that are ideas, thoughts, like perseverance. It's really, how do you show that to a child? How do you show somebody how not to give up? How do you help develop that mindset, right? That I can do it mindset. Well, reading books like The Little Engine That Could is one step with I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And there are other books, Flight School, it's a newer book where all the birds that are trying to learn how to fly. It's really funny, but it's about the same idea of perseverance. And, you know, we know from research that it's not the number of words that children hear, right? It's the quality of expression. So when we're just talking about things, we can say, look at the flowers, but then let's take the next step and say, the one with white petals is called a daisy, right? If we know the words, we should use them, and we should encourage adults to do the same thing. So adults, when you're out and about with your children and you're walking down your street, look at a tree. If you know the name of it, say, look at this tree. It's a maple tree. Children that know more words have better success as readers than children who know fewer words. So again, just encouraging, we're modeling the behavior. And then with the empower and encourage tip, we're giving them ideas about what they can do with their child throughout the day. We can pull words from a picture book, the ones that are not easily understood. Here's a good example, another example in addition to caps. So let's say, remember we were looking at a picture walk where you show a child the cover of the book and you ask them to predict what it's about. Well, what do you do with this? Spiffiest giant in town. So what's spiffy? Well, it could be the biggest giant. It could be the giant with the biggest feet. It could be, I mean, I don't know, the most patient giant, because it's allowing all these little micelings to crawl on it. So we just provide a simple child-friendly definition. This is not from the dictionary. This is just, I was thinking, goodness, how would I explain spiffy? So I'm thinking, well, it's like somebody who's dressed up in a fancy way and they're very neat and tidy. And then, you know, when you're getting ready to go to a party or maybe out with your family for a special event, you wear your best clothes and you put on your sparkly new shoes because you want to look spiffy. We can use oral storytelling with children. This is telling a story without pictures is something children are really not used to. It's so you could do it, but I would start out with maybe just doing like images from a book. This is obviously from the Gingerbread Boy, putting them up there and then telling the story. And then the next time you do it, take the images down and ask them to remember and tell the story with you, right? You can tell stories, encourage adults to tell stories about what they did. Adults, one way you can help your children learn more words, because kids who know a lot of words are better readers than kids who know fewer words, is to tell a story about the last time you went on an adventure together. Another example of an empower or encourage aside. And then, of course, the always popular once upon a time is a way children know that that's a signal that a story is coming. We can explain words from songs and rhymes. A lot of kids know this is a bucket, not so much a pail. When you talk about the twinkle, twinkle in the diamond in the sky, I don't think, does it really matter if they know a diamond is a gem? Probably not. But it's nice for them to think of it as something sparkly, which is what I think we help do with our hands. But when we talk about the diamond shape, and if we relate it to a diamond in the sky, again, that can help them see what it is. And this just occurred to me not that long ago. Do we really know what, do children know what a water spout is? A lot of kids live in apartment buildings and they might not be very familiar with the spout. So the first time we do the itsy bitsy spider, we just might want to have a picture like I did earlier that had the, the spider, the sun, and a water spout, just to make sure that children know what we're talking about. And then one of the best ways to grow vocabulary is through the use of information books. Okay, so please, when you're doing story time with children age 2 and up, go over to your nonfiction section and pull out some information books. And this is for a number of reasons. So the first one is that some children, just like some adults, have a preference for information books over storybooks. They're just more interested in them. Also, we're helping them develop their background knowledge, right? Information about the world around them, which will help them understand what they're reading when they're reading. Also, they see that books are used for multiple purposes. We use them for the enjoyment of stories and storytelling, sharing books, and also to find out information. And we can point out that information books are designed differently than storybooks. There's a table of contents. This tells us what's in the book. There's a glossary or like a dictionary that explains what different words mean. And then the index. So let's say, for example, I just wanted to find out, how do they break the ground with a bucket thing? And then I could look up breaking ground, or the grown-up could help them do that. And research tells us that there are double the exchanges, the interactions between adults and children around information books compared to storybooks. So why is that? I think part of it is because the grown-ups also going, wow, I didn't know that. That's my reaction with a lot of the information books that I share. I've learned a lot through sharing information books. So we're going to take a look at background knowledge, prior knowledge, conceptual thinking, content knowledge, and book and story knowledge. That's a lot of words there. Background knowledge is basically understanding the meaning of text and words. Comprehension is related to the amount of background knowledge a child possesses. So if you hear about early language-rich environment, that's the kind of environment with like books and book sharing that gives children the exposure to understand the world around them. It's information and knowledge that they acquire, again, through instruction or their own life experiences. It's a really important part of language and vocabulary development. And we can help children develop prior knowledge when we give babies and children the opportunity to explore and like narrate, put words into what they are doing, when we verbalize activities for them, when we encourage problem solving rather than just jumping in and doing it for them, asking them to puzzle things out and to think about what they're doing. Explaining how we're doing what we're doing to solve a problem. When children play with puzzles, they're learning all kinds of things by parts to whole, how things fit together, perseverance, trying again and again. If it doesn't work one way, maybe it'll work another way. We can compare and contrast things. It helps children see things kind of with different perspective. We can model pretend play when we take like a pot or a pan and we bang on it and say, here's your musical instrument, right? Encouraging them to do the same thing. When we explain things as a process and put things in order, first we first we wash our face, then we brush our teeth, and then we put on our pajamas or whatever it is. And we model wonder and thinking. We can think aloud and use phrases like, I wonder what would happen if. And this helps children see things from a different point of view, asking things like, what would happen if it just kept getting colder and colder and colder and colder? You know, everything would freeze. What could we do? What would happen? I don't know, just encouraging adults to just make things up and play around with ideas and thoughts. And also relating books to the children's own lives, right? And jumping off from books into like, acting things out from books, using stories as that kind of playful activity, is kind of mixing fantasy up with reality when you're taking a story and making it real. But that's fun. It's all good for helping children develop their prior knowledge.
Hey, Pamela,
Mhm.
we have a question in the chat regarding calling it by its name. She runs into an issue with her 4-year-old daughter where she learns a specific name, for example, maple tree. And so then the 4-year-old calls everything a maple tree.
Yeah, it's gonna not flexible.
And doesn't believe her when she tries to correct her. So any tips or thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually did this in a story time today with trees, and I was talking about how things are the same and different. And I mean, it did go well, sort of, but on the other hand, so what she needs to understand that things can be the same and different, right? If you had a maple leaf, which broke, sorry. If you had a maple leaf and a leaf from a tulip tree, how are they the same? They're both leaves. They both have stems. How are they different? They're from different trees. So do you see where I'm going with this? They're the same because they're leaves, but they're different because they're from different trees. So it's being able to understand that things can be the same and different. Children are the same, they're all children, but each one is different and unique. Does that help? Is that making sense? It's like you could point out, well, look, here's the leaf from the maple tree, here's the leaf from the other tree. They're not the same. So maybe she'll believe that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And good luck when she's a teenager. I had one like that. It doesn't necessarily get a lot better. Okay, back to conceptual thinking. Sorry, I should have forwarded this. Understanding the meaning of text and words and is related to the amount of background knowledge that children possess. And, it all comes down to talk. So conceptual thinking, this is pretty complex but it makes sense that it's it kind of develops over time, right? Conceptual thinking develops over time. And children have different skills and abilities based in part on their age and experience. So if you take object permanence, well, conceptual thinking is the ability to think about things that are not immediately in front of you. So it's abstract thought, right? Thus the word conceptual. It's the construction of thought processes like remembering, problem solving, the ability to make decisions, and includes things like concepts like time and seasons, but not necessarily specific things like opposites. It's kind of more general and more broad. And we can use strategies to encourage understanding of thinking skills, again, which develop over time. So object permanence, from little children, we'll just go through this pretty quickly, is when they're about 8 or 10 months old. It's the beginning of abstract thought because they can hold something in their brain that's not in front of them. And they know that when it's gone, it will come back. Babies understand cause and effect when, for example, when they cry, somebody comes and helps them. They have the ability, they know about sequencing, that when someone gets up to do, for example, the steps involved in making food or getting a bottle ready, things like that. Cause and effect. If you see when sometimes people attach little rattles to babies' wrists and they're shaking, and then the one day they're like, oh my gosh, I'm the one that's doing that. That's when babies start to see cause and effect. They see a picture of a dog and they know that it represents an actual dog, right? Toddlers can group objects together according to one characteristic or trait. They have a better memory, so they can remember the sequence of things that we put on socks before shoes. 2-year-olds are very interested in how things work. They can count by rote, but they probably don't really know what the numbers mean yet. But they can do pretend play with a baby doll and things like that. Your 3-year-old, having more words, can sort and match things that have perhaps 2 characteristics or qualities. They can talk about things that are that's not the present. They can remember about what they've done. They like to play games with colors and sizes and sort things and do things like that. Your 4-year-old's going to be asking you why, how things work. Taking things apart, maybe playing around with things like that, a better sense of time, a little better than just morning and night. They can do more one-to-one correspondence with larger groups of people, and they have getting good at symbolic thinking when one thing represents another. And they're less dependent on props in their imaginative play. They can just generalize better, and they can talk about the past and the future. Now, all of this, each age group shows a little bit of this, but by the time they're 5, they have a much better sense of time. They can understand more about like days of the week. Their play, imaginative play, is richer. It's of a higher level, because they are able to think more conceptually, right? And they can play around with ideas about things that are not in the here and now to a much, much larger and deeper extent. We can help children develop content knowledge in various ways, as I mentioned already, using information books, picking topics that are of interest to them and to you. And when we do pick an information book, we can introduce new information and topics related to them, always adding or scaffolding onto them what we know. So when we read a book like this with a young child, we're going to describe and label what it is that we're seeing. And we're going to talk about what we know and what we think the child might know. Remember when we were, I'm currently in rural Ohio, remember when we saw the really big tractor out on the road and we had to slow down? Wow, look how big the wheels are. They're enormous. So children that have strong content knowledge have an easier time understanding what they're reading because they have more words and information in their word bank, okay? And they can apply what they know to what they're reading. And that's kind of the goal of all of this. And these kinds of books, Jessie Bear, such an old sweet book, has morning, what Jessie Bear, what will you wear in the morning, and then through the day. Concepts, big, bigger, biggest. A cumulative tale, and a book wherein the woodpecker has to solve a problem. How can that woodpecker get the waffles that he so desperately needs? Information books, so rich in language and information. And that's why, again, we should try to use them every time that we have a story time that has 2-year-olds and up. Even books like With Llama Llama Red Pajama, I mean, we can work with the idea of just a basic concept of like what we could ask a question: what could Llama Llama do to help themselves feel better waiting for their mom? And then add to this with an information book, right? So we're giving them some concrete information and asking them to think conceptually about what could they do, using words for feelings. So kind of a combination playing off of each other. Books and story knowledge includes print motivation, the child's interest in and enjoyment of books and reading. So print motivation is really, really helpful when children, and there's about 60% of children, have a difficult time learning how to read, okay? So for them, knowing that, loving books and having positive experiences with them is going to help them stick to it if reading should become difficult. And so we encourage this when we let them play around with the books, when we have fun and interesting and exciting interactions around books. And when we share books like this one, for example, that has really big print, and read it aloud in an interactive manner. That keeps them engaged in the story and motivated to learn how to read. Children also, through book sharing, learn about story structure and the language of books. So I had mentioned earlier narrative skills, a child's ability to describe things and events, to tell and retell stories. And we can do that when we share books that have a clear narrative line all the way through. Some books don't even have, don't really tell a story. They share information, or they're fun to read, or they're very rhymey, but maybe, there's not a clear beginning, middle, and end. We want children to become familiar with story structure and the language of books. The story structure, as I mentioned, beginning, middle, and end. And your classic folk tales have the repeating motifs, usually in numbers of 3. They have a very clear structure to them. There's the introduction of the characters, there's some kind of issue or something that happens in the middle, and then a resolution at the end. And this helps children understand how stories work. So when they're reading books themselves, they have an idea of where they're going, how the book is actually going to work. And some books are just, so we like to say that like any book has every skill in it, right? Every component in it. And to a large extent, that's true. Some books are so rich with the imagery and the language and the storyline, vocabulary, phonological awareness, all the different components that you could pick any component from certain books and run with it. So what we're going to look at now are, well, it's going to be your turn to figure out some early literacy tips based on your own story times. You're going to look at your story time and figure out which element you want to tie it. You want to find an element in your story time and tie it back to an early literacy component. You can pick a book if you want, or you can pick another activity that you're doing within story time. Okay, either way. And you want to have also an empower or encourage tip, something that the adults can do at home or when they're out and about to help their child develop the early literacy component that you're talking about. Now, remember, you're only doing one component. Please don't jumble everything up together, because people can only, it's a new idea for a lot of the adults in the room. So we just want to share the one component with them, not two different things, because they'll get confused. And so you can take it by, as I mentioned in the beginning, with an activity. You can use the definition and then tie it back to one of the two skills of reading, either decoding or comprehension, remembering how these are related to one another. Okay, here are the definitions. You could use a practice if you want. When you sing songs with children, you're helping them to hear the smaller sounds in words, which helps them decode or figure out what they're reading when they're bigger. And then figure out something to say to the adult so that they can do this on their own. Okay, now in your handouts, I'll go through a few tips really quickly. For singing, we told you there's a distinct note for each syllable so that when we sing, they hear the smaller sounds in words. If I just said, singing with your children helps them get ready to read, that's not a good aside, because it doesn't tell them how is it helping them get ready to read. It doesn't mention decoding. Okay, you need to be complete in what you're doing here. Factual books help children build their background information, their background knowledge, which will help them understand what they read when they're bigger. See, and I'm making these a lot shorter. You also have a handout of suggested tips. They're very wordy. This is to give you the option to make these sound like how you would actually talk based on the information that you have. When we do finger plays, we're helping them develop small muscle coordination, which will help them later when they write. Next week, we're going to do a quick review of the practices and how they're related to this. So when we point out the text or the labels on containers, we're helping children understand that we read the text, not the word, not the pictures. This will help them when they're learning how to read. So you get the idea. So you have in your handouts an example tip, and it so nicely tells you what all these different components are. So you're going to be split up into rooms. So it's about 20 of. So let's take about, I guess even with 15 minutes, we're good, and we'll come back and we'll pick up and chat for 5, and we'll resume this the next time that we're together to talk about the practices and any other questions you might have on how to do this, as well as other ways of using early literacy information in your libraries. Okay, so does everybody have it?
Sounds good. All right.
All right.
I'm gonna just move a couple people real quick in here. And I'm gonna send you guys out for 15 minutes. Here you go. We will be back here in 15. All right. So as we start to come back here, welcome back. I saw somebody doing a big stretch. Pamela, you're good to
finish up today.
Yeah.
So I was able to pop into a couple of rooms. Kathy, I kind of felt like, like somebody had a wand and like, boop, you go there, and then boop, you go there. So that was fun. Thank you. And from what I saw, people are really getting the idea. And that's really great to see, because the two different groups each had different approaches. We talked about how to use a casual kind of approach, not so we don't feel like I know all this and you don't know anything and things like that. For example, somebody, the ice cream fan out there uses empty drums, and they bang the words. And then for her encouragement, it was, when you're this at home, do this at home with your pots and pans. And then we're doing a lot of encouragements for parents. It's incredible that something this easy and this fun is going to help your children decode or figure out what they're reading. Like, so that we can take that kind of wow, this is amazing approach, and not this like, well, you better be decoding or your kid's never going to learn how to read. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Plus, I mean, I'm not like a reading expert. I've read research and I've practiced this stuff, but I'm learning too, and they're learning. Grown-ups want to do the best they can for their kids. They are doing the best they can. And from what they've been through in the last almost 2 years, all the encouragement and kindness and you got this, you're doing a great job that they can hear would probably just really do a lot to help them out. And I was talking with one group so I like to write down my early literacy asides on the back of a book. So I write it on a Post-it note and then I stick it on the back of the book. So when I'm doing something related to a book or whatever, I can just read it. Or even if I'm not using that book, I can hold the book up as if I'm casually referring to it and then read it, so that I don't have to worry that I'm going to say it wrong until I'm more comfortable doing this. So I think that's feel free to do that and nobody will know. And even if they know, I mean, really, it doesn't make any difference. So does anybody have any questions that I can answer in the next little bit of time that we have? Let's see, anything in the chat that I should?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
Any
All right.
questions, folks?
Anything?
I think they're absorbing it all today.
I know. I always feel like it goes so fast. So here's what we're going to do the next time. We're going to look at 2 of the practices we didn't get to, which are writing and playing. Okay. And then those are kind of a nice segue into some different kinds of activities that you can do in your library. A lot of it after story time. We're going to take a quick look at the content in the Every Child Ready to Read manual. And I'm not really sure if you all feel like you need more practice doing the asides. Is there, what's the general sense of the body? Do we need more practice doing asides? Do you want to do some with practices?
In the chat, if you want to put yes for practices for next week.
You want to practice with practices, have another go around. If you feel confident in doing them, then we won't spend more time on them. Yes, more practice. Okay, good. That's fine. Yes, I know it's complicated, isn't it? Okay, we'll do more practices. I will, okay. We'll do writing and play, and then we'll practice it again. And if you have, when you think about it, if you have, it is nice to have a small group. I know, right? If you're doing a story time between now and then, or you just want to jot a few practice asides down, do that and bring them with you, and we'll see how it goes. You can also, I can give, Kathy, you can share my email if anybody has anything they want me to look at ahead of time. You want to see, like, does this work? Send it to me. I'm happy to answer. I like to see how people use the information that we're dealing with here. I know it's a lot to absorb in a short period of time, and I do appreciate your patience and willingness to hang in there with me. So please let me know, any of your thoughts that you want to ask me, and I shall get back to you. Meanwhile, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. And next time, Kathy's going to send me some of the grab and go kinds of projects that you all have been working on, and we're going to take a look at them. So be thinking about this. How can we inject them with early literacy components? What can we do to get that little bit of value added aspect to that, so that when adults pick up something to do at home, that they'll see the connection between the activity or the book and what they're doing with their children. Okay, I think that'll be fun. I haven't, I left regular library work right before COVID hit. So I don't have much experience with creating these grab and go kits or activity things that you all have been doing. So I think it's probably, 3 o'clock on the dot. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, send them to Kathy and she will go ahead and send them to me and we'll see what we can come up with. Great, I'm glad you appreciated the tips. I'm glad that you all came and spent this time with me, and I look forward to one more session. Everybody hang in there. We're getting to the end.
Almost there. All right. Thank you so much, Pamela.
Oh,
Really
thank you,
appreciate your time.
everybody. I appreciate you all too. Thanks, everyone.
Have
Take
a
good
great day.
care. You too. Take good care.